BCA-101. This is week 9. This is right after spring break. So first thing I want to talk about, on the 21st, the students did a follow-up from Unit 3 and 4. Primarily talking about devices in Unit 3, using some software similar to what we're using here to describe those devices in Unit 4. We need to do a little bit of a follow-up from that yet. So we started off then, that was Monday, so on Wednesday, this screen here is from Wednesday, we talked about the class in general, kind of tried to get caught up where we've been. We talked about some things there. We talked about where we were going. So we talked about the theory of the class, we talked about skills, the skills we're learning, and then we talked about, are they able to do the work, more or less, or I think I used the word willing. Are we willing to do what needs to be done? So we talked about that and led into some review. We reviewed a little bit about hardware, some terminology. I'm not going to go through that again. Try to clear up arithmetic logic unit and registers on the processor. Talk about flash, MB RAM a little bit, RAM memory. And then we talked about storage. Still trying to just make sure we distinguish between memory and storage. Alright. Then we talked about hardware and how system software communicated with the hardware. And primarily we talked about the OS and different types of OS. Talk about why that's important. And then applications communicate with system software, or typically, more specifically, the OS. The users communicate with the application software. We did some work, and our current work now is working on this connection to how we connect networks together. So we could have, a system here, a computer system, or some device, could be either one, computer system, how that device then connects through other devices in order to connect to, for example, a web server. And a web server is really, again, it's a computer running some software that allows us to pull websites off of it. We're going to have some rules about the communication. We have to figure out what the rules are and how to communicate. And we talk a little bit about we have to have addresses. So we have to have addresses in the device. And we're going to learn there's actually two major ones. We got a physical one that stays with the device. And then we have a logical one that the device gets depending on where it's at. So your laptop would get one logical address when you're home. It would get a different one when you're on campus. It would get a different one when you're at the coffee shop. But it always has the same physical address. It's kind of like your name goes with you, but where you live would be your logical address. Does that make a bit of sense at this point? We used this address on campus to log into a server. And we're going to call that work server number 1. And we used PuTTY to access that server. And eventually we're going to use, you can either use, we used FileZilla, if I spelled that right, or you can use Win S Secure Copy. Use either one of those, and we're going to connect to the server and transfer files. So we can create files for our web page and then transfer them up to the server. This server also works as a web server. This is the local private address. Okay, it's local. It's at the college. This is the public address that we'll use to access this information. So you would access this anywhere outside of the IT area in which we have classes. So let's look at the example. This was Friday, and that would have been, let's see here, that would have been the 25th of 2016. So we started off, we talked about mailing a letter. And in that letter, some key information. You got some name, okay, we're going to talk about that later. Then you have some kind of an address and a very crucial piece of information known as a zip code. That zip code has to be placed in basically the correct spot on the letter. Return address. So we mail a letter. So when the letter gets mailed, this is a primary concern, the zip code. That gets the letter to the correct area. All these rules that govern how we mail stuff, they're known as a protocol. The same thing's true in networks. Trying to send information via a network, networks follow protocols. And we're just going to learn a few. Okay, we're not going to learn too many. So in networking, we also have an address. We have a physical address in the device, and the device also has a logical address. The logical address we give the device is a private address. Then, in the process, if you're going out to the internet, your device will be connected to a public address to use in the internet. And that public address then will move through the internet and then send information back to your particular location, which then eventually gets changed back into the private address and comes back to your device. Alright, so how that works via the internet, there's a protocol, Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol, IP Internet Protocol. An IP address, the ones we're using are the logical ones. Okay, the physical addresses are a media access control address. Learn more about that later. Screen 5 of 6. Let's talk a little bit about this. We looked at a computer and we looked at the command prompt. And then we had this prompt, and we could type commands and make the computer do things. Okay? In there, we looked at that we had directories, and in a GUI, a graphical user interface, which most people are used to, like Windows has one, in which you can click on things, and your phone's got it, which you can tap and so forth. They're called folders there, but they're the same thing. You use them to organize files on a hard drive, on our storage, wherever that storage might be. So we looked at this scenario. We have computers in the room, and then they have a U drive, and that U drive is connected to the IT area here on campus. Computers physically, we have those blue cables that connect them to a switch. Then that switch is connected to a multi-layered switch, which eventually is connected to a router. Somewhere in here we have fiber optic going to another router, and fiber actually leaves the college, goes to the ICN, Iowa Communications Network, which is our internet service provider. Okay? So we worked on some examples of this. We talked about the network where we have another switch. We have a switch here. This switch is connected to some server where the U drive is. Here on campus, we have some similar things. If we were to draw that out much bigger, there's drives over here too that the students can access, and all the things that are there. We'll talk more specifically about that later. So we talked about it's got a processor, we got RAM, we got storage on the computers. PCs, this is MPC 229. They're all connected on out. Now there's lots of PCs connected to the switch, and 229 is actually 30. Actually, there's more than 30. There's probably about 35 on a switch or different switches in there. So how does a switch know which computer is which? It uses what we talked about before, that physical address, or that media access control address, the physical address. And we looked at a couple of those in class in the machines. So here's that ISP we talked about. We talked a little bit about, not much, but a little bit about the routers out here in the internet. And they use this protocol, transmission control protocol, internet protocol, okay? And they exchange information, and they find the best way to exchange it through the internet. And then, like if we're going to Facebook, we use Facebook example. They have a router here, a router on the edge of the internet, and somehow they would be connected in to these routers. And these routers use addresses to change information through. We looked at on campus. We had the PCs, and we looked at our private address on the PCs, and then we did something, and we looked at what we had for a public address from the PCs, which turned out to be 207.165.226.97, and we all had the same one. So what happens is your private address gets translated into a public address, and we can all use the same public address out on the internet, because it doesn't make a difference which website anybody was going to. Out there on the internet, they were going to send all that stuff back to our ISP, and our ISP knows this belongs to NIACC, so they send it to NIACC, and then NIACC knows this information here at NIACC goes that way instead of this way, because a router can look at the address. Kind of like the mailman looking at the zip code. The zip code, you know, you can think of this kind of like a zip code. That mail gets to the right town, and then in the right town, you know, now it's in the right town up here. Now they're going to send it to the right network in the town, so it gets to the right house. And once it gets in the house, you look at that specific, you could think of it like the MAC address, the address that's specific to the device. You can look at the person's name, and now you know exactly who to give it to. We will dig in a little bit deeper, not too much more, as we continue on through the networking section. That's it for today.